And so everything then changes. So what we're then going to say is that truth is what works, right, for society. Not necessarily, right, what works for the individual. And so when we have individual weirdos and individual sick or evil people, we absolutely can be morally condemnatory toward them. Well, maybe not absolutely morally condemnatory, but we can be very strongly morally condemnatory from the perspective of saying that their approach to achieving their individual desires does not work for society. It undercuts society, it causes society's fabric to break down, people don't trust each other, they don't interact with each other, and so forth, right? So that way of operating in the world is socially destructive, and so from the perspective of what works for society, we can lodge moral objections against those individuals who are usually in the small minority against whatever it is that they're doing. So if we add this then qualifier all the way through this derivation here, we then say what works is what satisfy social, right, desires, right, or social goals, right, or social needs. And we would add the social here. Desires then are socially, right, subjective. Right? What counts as a legitimate desire is something that evolves in the course of social evolution and, right, and social discussion, right, and debate and so forth. Truth then is something that is not individualistically subjective but rather socially subjective. And of course subjects, societies and so forth are variable, and so we would then say truth is socially variable. What is going to work for this culture or this society at this time is not necessarily what's going to work for that culture at that time. And so just across cultures then, we need to be a lot more tolerant and less dogmatic, right, and so forth. Okay, so problem solved on the assumption that the problem we're trying to solve is the individual weirdos, right, and sickos. This is the approach that John Dewey in the second generation especially emphasizes, and so for him, the socialization, right, of values becomes absolutely important. And also this concept here of democracy, which I've had in the scare quotes for quite a while, becomes a very important concept in the pragmatic lexicon, so to speak. But again, if we apply it to this framework here, we see that democracy is now being used a whole lot more broadly rather. Democracy is not for the pragmatists, particularly the pragmatists of the John Dewey, right, approach, which is the dominant approach. It's not simply a matter of a divisive majority rule on politics. Whoever gets the most votes in this particular election cycle has political power for the next X years, and then we go through the process again and reassign political power. Rather, democracy, that is to say, this process of social debate, social discussion, social trying to achieve consensus, social voting, sometimes explicitly, sometimes tacitly, is much deeper than simply politics. It is the democratic process through which we decide what is moral. It's also an epistemological concept. It is the democratic process through which we decide what is true, right? What's true for our society, what is moral for our society, what is going to be our political structure, right, for the next period of time, right, in our society. So what we have then is a deep, right, democracy. Democracy is a deep philosophical concept covering all of the branches, right, of philosophy, not simply the political applications in this case. All right, problem solved, but not entirely, because there's then an additional problem. We'll call this problem 2. The pragmatists will solve the problem of individual weirdos by socializing things, but we'll call this problem sub 2. The idealists and the realists will just come back and say, this really just kicks things upstairs, because what then do we say about not individual weirdos, but societies that are outright weird, right, or sick, right? We do know there are lots of societies that have long-standing cultural practices that most of the people in that society don't have any particular problem with. Selling daughters into prostitution is still a practice in some parts of the world. Some parts of the world have no problem with racism, right, with genocide if you're a part of the wrong ethnic group. Treating women as second, third, or fourth class citizens. What do we say? And then we get out the historical heavy artillery. What do we say about slavery? Do we just say that slavery was morally unobjectionable because in that society's time and according to their cultural practices, what they had evolved was the slavery, and no one objected to it, and so we can't impose our society standards on them? What do we say about Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust and various other kinds of genocides that have occurred historically and so on? The objection is going to be that the same problem at the individual level is just kicked upstairs to the social level and we haven't really solved it. And this is where, in effect, the cutting edge of the debate between the pragmatists, the realists, and the idealists carries on. What do we say about other societies with dramatically different moral frameworks? Is it possible for us to find some objective framework that should apply across all societies? Or is it the case, as the pragmatists say, that we are stuck in a socially bound intellectual and moral framework and we can't get outside of that to apply our standards across cultures? Okay, well, pause there.